Right. So there's been an attack on the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran, and it's widely assumed and also practically admitted that Israel was behind it. I mean, no surprise there. Let me show you what's going on here. So here, this is from the Jerusalem Post, April 12th. Mossad is behind the cyber attack on Iran's Natanz nuclear facility. All right, and so I mean, there are various ways we know this is true because, first of all, Israeli media, they were like all over the place. They're just basically saying that, yeah, the Mossad was behind it. And, you know, the only thing that's not exactly clear is whether it was a cyber attack or not, because, you know, basically this facility at Natanz, it's been subject to a cyber attack in the past. In 2010, under Obama, the CIA worked with Mossad on a virus, on a computer virus called Stuxnet, right? And so, you know, like most scientific installations in the world, like most laboratories, there's an air gap. The computers are not connected to the internet, right, for security reasons. And so they somehow managed to get this virus in, and what it would do, it would spin the centrifuges at 3 times the rate and break them. And they sabotaged it, basically, you know? I mean, it's insane. And that was in 2010. And then, of course, from 2010 to 2012, and again, a few months ago, you know, you had Israel killing nuclear scientists in Iran, like in broad daylight. You know, they come up on a moped, stick a bomb, or just shoot the guy in front of his house. I mean, just to show you over here, like this one, for example, this piece from 2011, right? They killed 35-year-old Dariush Rezai, and if you go on Wikipedia, I mean, this is just a list of them over here. And then the latest one was Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, right? And I mean, they don't care if it's a government official, you know, they don't care if he's a nuclear scientist. They go and kill people with impunity. They sabotage nuclear sites, which is basically nuclear terrorism, frankly. And last year in June, I believe, there was a mysterious explosion at this site again, at Natanz, right? So, yeah, and by the way, for the assassinations, if you go and read, what's the name of the book again? Rise and Kill First by Ronan Bergman. He interviewed tons of people from the Mossad. I did like 1,000 interviews, and you know, they admit that they were behind this, right? We know this as a fact that Israel killed those scientists, and you know, it's so of course it's no surprise that they did this yesterday. And I just want to play you a clip over here from Sayyid Mohammed Marendi, right? So he's a professor at University of Tehran, and he's a good friend. He's a great friend of the show, and there's a long interview I did with him, which you should go watch. It's on the channel, and I've had him on my TV show as well. So check this out, right? I want to play this clip for you, and listen to what he says about the attack, right?
Good to have you with us today. Iran is vowing revenge against Israel after a blackout at an underground nuclear site in Natanz. Tehran alleges its systems were breached by Tel Aviv and has branded the cyber attack an act of terrorism.
Various sources confirm that the Zionist regime was behind this incident. Iran's response will be to exact revenge on the Zionist regime at the right time and place.
The Natanz facility suffered an outage on Sunday, a day after the president unveiled a new set of advanced centrifuges for faster uranium enrichment. And the incident threatens to overshadow ongoing talks between Iran and world powers on reviving the 2015 nuclear deal. Now, Tehran claims the attack was designed precisely to scupper those talks. Well, we're now joined live here on the program by political analyst Syed Mohammed Marandi from the University of Tehran, joining us here on RT. Great to see you today. It's tough to get a really clear picture of exactly what happened. We understand the report of a power outage or a blackout. Is there any report that you can tell us about damage that might have occurred to the facility?
Well, they're saying it wasn't a cyber attack, and I think that's probably accurate because it's not connected to the internet. One of the halls was damaged. The Natanz facilities has 4 or 5 halls where enrichment takes place, and it wasn't in the halls where they had their advanced centrifuges, the IR9, 8, and IR6. So the old centrifuges were damaged in one of the halls, and they're saying that in 7 to 9 weeks they will be producing as normal, and they will be replacing the old centrifuges with the more advanced and the state-of-the-art centrifuges from here on.
Mr.
But
Marandi,
the belief is that this was a joint operation.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick you up on that, because the Israeli media were quick to boast that the outage was the work of Mossad, while on Sunday, the Israeli Prime Minister had this to say. Have a quick listen to this.
The fight against Iran and its proxies, the fight against Iran's nuclear program, the fight against Iran's nuclearization is a huge task.
Mr. Marandi, is it possible that this could be interpreted as some kind of admission, do you think?
Well, if it is, and I think it is, that means that the Israeli regime is acknowledging that they've carried out an attack on a sovereign country. And of course, that would normally be condemned by the international community. It would go to the UN Security Council, and the regime would face sanctions. But we know the Israeli regime regularly bombs Syrian army soldiers. They say they bomb Iranians, but we know they don't. There are no names of any dead or murdered Iranians coming out from the Israeli media. They bomb Syrian government soldiers to help the extremists. They strike at Gaza with impunity, and they fly over Lebanese airspace with impunity, and no one says anything. So obviously the Europeans and the Americans will allow the Israelis to get away with everything. But this wasn't an act that was carried out by the Israelis alone. In the past, the Israelis worked with the CIA and CENTCOM, and it is believed that by some that some of the IAEA inspectors may have passed on information. But apparently it was an act of sabotage. An individual caused damage to the electrical power, which caused damage to one of the halls.
Mr. Marandi, I'm running very low on time here. Just one more question, if I may. Tehran has promised revenge. What kind of form could that possibly take, do you think?
Well, the Israeli regime has murdered an Iranian deputy minister a few months ago with U.S. support. This act of sabotage was probably carried out with U.S. support. No one believes the notion that the Israelis act separately from the Americans. It's just beyond belief. So I think that ultimately the Iranians will respond, and they will respond in a big way for a number of things that the Israelis have done. But the Iranians are patient, and they're known for their patience. But I think the last 20 years have shown that Iran knows where to push things.
Mr. Syed Mohammed Marandi from the University of Tehran, a political analyst joining us here on RT International. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Right. So, I mean, you know, right now in Vienna, okay, they're having talks about resuming the nuclear deal, indirect talks, right? So you have two groups that are working. You have one that is focused on what Iran could do to return to the original limitations of the JCPOA, and another group, another working group about how the U.S. will return to the deal. And Israel hates the nuclear deal, right? For a variety of reasons. Netanyahu hates the nuclear deal, right? That's one of the main reasons he had beef with Obama, right? Because it's not about you would think that, okay, well, hold on a second. The deal is supposed to limit Iran's nuclear program, which again it's a civilian nuclear program. Like, yeah, I mean, logically you need a nuclear program to get nuclear weapons, but Iran is not making nuclear weapons. Otherwise, the entire planet would know. Iran is subject to the most strict and stringent verification of any country. Like, if there's one country where you know they don't have nuclear weapons, it's Iran, because the IAEA has 24/7 cameras in there. They have inspectors going all over the place. You can't make a nuclear bomb in 2021 or even 20 years ago without someone knowing, right? It just doesn't work. And the JCPOA, it's supposed to limit Iran's breakout time. Israel knows that they don't have nukes. So you would think that, okay, well, if they're so scared about that, then why don't they like the nuclear deal? Because it's not about nukes. They want Iran's support for resistance in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq to be in that deal as well, right? They want to basically, neuter Iran. They want to kneecap its defense capabilities. They also want the ballistic missile program included in that, which is why Trump left the deal. He wanted these two things in there, which is a Zionist position. It's an Israeli position. It's not about nukes. Nothing to do with that. It's just bullshit. It's just propaganda. And, Iran is part of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Under that treaty, you have the right to a civilian nuclear program. So, I mean, Israel doesn't care, right? The United States doesn't care. They don't even want Iran to have that either, because you also have to consider Iran's economy is based on, largely based on oil, not only oil, but it is one of the world's largest oil producers. And, having nuclear energy lets you kind of wean off of that. You don't have to depend on that. And they won't even tolerate that either, right? So there are a lot of reasons. But anyway, just going back to what happened, they have the talks going on here right now in Vienna. And it's so typical of Israel to come and sabotage that, right? It's so goddamn typical. I mean, what you essentially have, they did this with the Palestinians, by the way. Like, every time there was almost going to be some kind of, breakthrough with the peace talks with the Palestinians, they always go and sabotage it because they don't want a two-state solution. They say they want a two-state solution, but they don't. And I feel like, the United States is playing good cop. Yeah, how sarcastic. They're playing good cop and Israel's playing bad cop. So, the United States saying, oh yeah, we want diplomacy, right? And Israel is, of course, going behind the scenes in the dark and just blowing shit up or carrying out cyber attacks or killing nuclear scientists. And they're trying to squeeze Iran from both sides, right? And I don't know, man. I mean, right now, what I've seen on social media, for some of the reactions, and again, this is just anecdotal. It's by no means, a full representation. But from what I've seen on social media, you have a lot of Iranians that are saying that, Israel is trying to sabotage the talks. Like, they want Iran to just pack up and leave, right? And they want just to ruin the entire diplomatic process. And then you have other people that are saying, well, Iran has been too soft and too patient. And if you don't stand up to a bully, they're going to keep bullying you. And I understand both viewpoints, if we're being honest, because, both are true. And it's, I don't know, man, it's a tough situation. It really is. They are trying to squeeze Iran. They are trying to destroy Iran. And I just say one thing. Iran invented chess, right? So they understand how to be patient. They understand how to think long term. So I would not underestimate a civilization that is thousands of years old at all, right? I would not do that. So, in any case, just going back to Jawad Zarif, who is the foreign minister for Iran. Again, I regard him as one of the classic diplomats, right? Like Bashar al-Ja'fari. These are like old school real diplomats, you know what I'm saying? So, he put out a tweet over here saying that he wrote to the UN Secretary General about what Israel did, right? And he calls it an act of nuclear terrorism. That really is the right term, right? Deliberate targeting of a safeguarded nuclear facility with high risk of indiscriminate release of radioactive material is nuclear terrorism and a war crime. It is, man. It is. I mean, think of how irresponsible that is, that they're just regularly sabotaging a nuclear site. I mean, can you imagine if there was a spill? Can you imagine if it got out of hand, that the damage they thought is going to cause? Which even if like a a bolt fell out of the wall, even if like one nut was damaged, it's still wrong. Like how, it's not your country. What are you doing there? Right? It's still an attack, even if one bolt falls out of the wall. But I mean, just think of the consequences. What could happen, right? If you had a radioactive spill. This is insane. I don't know any other country on the face of this planet that goes and assassinates nuclear scientists in broad daylight. You know, that goes and bombs other countries like Syria week in, week out. And then they attack a nuclear site multiple times. And no one says anything. Again, like, could you imagine if Iran was doing this, like assassinating Israeli scientists in Palestine in broad daylight? There would be a war. Like the next minute, there would be a war, which is what Israel would love, by the way, right? So they can drag the United States into that with them. There would be a war. Can you imagine if Iran sabotaged a nuclear facility in Israel? Yeah, they have nukes, huh? In Israel, we mean Palestine, occupied Palestine. So there's a clear double standard here, right? There's a clear double standard. They are literally committing terrorism. This is a terrorist act, one of many, and nuclear terrorism on top of it, right? Like they don't even care if it doesn't damage the environment. It could do damage to several countries. You know, when Chernobyl happened, for example, you know, it's still uninhabitable to this day. At the time, all of the surrounding countries, right? You had to have a lockdown. You couldn't go outside because of they had to go and clean all of the streets. I mean, it's a mess, right? You had an entire cloud carrying nuclear particles to other countries. Think how outrageously irresponsible what they're doing is, and criminal, right? It's truly criminal. And you know, as Professor Merendi pointed out, 100% the United States is with them. You know, I would even go a bit further and say that just like with Stuxnet, for example, I wouldn't put it past Israel to just do things, you know, in the spur of the moment without even telling the United States. They did that with Stuxnet. They started modifying the code and released it. Like you know, they don't care. And it's absolutely insane that they get away with this kind of stuff. So, you know, you have the nuclear talks resuming tomorrow on the 14th. And again, these are indirect talks, and Iran has made it very clear they will not tolerate anything less than complete removal of sanctions. And they don't want just the Trump-era sanctions that are nuclear. They want all of the Trump-era sanctions, right? So it's not just pertaining to the nuclear deal. They want all sanctions lifted. And you have to consider that this has been an unfair deal in some ways, in many ways, because, you know, Iran is subject to verification. There are cameras monitoring their nuclear facilities. They have special seals. You know, every single gram of fissile material, it's counted by the CIA. Yeah, they're probably getting information too by the IAEA. And the thing is that, what about the United States? Like, who's verifying that the United States and their allies are keeping their end of the deal? Who's verifying that? There needs to be verification, you know, that shipping, banking, the oil sector, that these and much more, they're not going to be, once again, overturned and have sanctions reimposed on them by another Trump or, you know, whatever ghoul comes out of the next administration. So it's a difficult process, right? And again, there are a lot of mixed emotions about this, which I can understand, because it's like, you know, even when you act in good faith with the United States and their allies, look what they do, right? Even when Iran holds up its end of the deal, they renege on their commitments, and then they reimpose sanctions, and they let Israel, right? They let Israel go and continue assassinating nuclear scientists and committing acts of sabotage and terrorism. It's insane. So I mean, you know, I understand the people who are saying like, oh no, they're doing this on purpose to try and get Iran to just walk out. But I also understand the people who are saying that it's like, at what point do you say enough is enough, right? Again, Israel is a criminal enterprise, and they really get away with genocide. They get away with terrorism. Even when they assassinated in Dubai, you remember this? I think it was also a decade ago. So yeah, about a decade ago now. They assassinated someone from Hamas, I believe it was, and they used fake Australian passports, fake British passports, right? They falsified passports of their own so-called allies, and no one did a shit. No punishment, no controversy, nothing, right? Think about that. Insane. It's really insane what they get away with. Like they even commit crimes against their own allies in the name of their own allies, and they just get away with it. You know, it's staggering, honestly. So anyway, we'll see how these these talks go, and you know what effect this has on the program. In any case, I think it's important to note one more thing. You know, Israel always exaggerates what they do. That's how you do counterintelligence, right? You mix in truth with lies, and sometimes just flat out lies you release in the media. Because if you go and look at what they're saying in the media over here, right? This is from Jerusalem Post. They're saying that Israeli explosion sets back Natanz enrichment facility by 9 months. 9 months. And, you know, if you look at other sources, they're saying, no, it wasn't a cyber attack, it was an explosion. And if you go and you look at when they assassinated Fakhrizadeh a few months ago, you know, there's a story that came out that they actually used a long-range 1-ton gun that was controlled by AI, and it's just like, yeah, okay, calm down, you know, like, just they love exaggerating because, you know, one, it's propaganda, like, oh, look how amazing we are, look how deep we can penetrate into Iran, and the Iranians are so stupid, and we smuggled a 1-ton gun without them noticing. I mean, it's just nonsense. And the other effect of it, of course, the other purpose of counterintelligence, you know, they try to overstate their capabilities, right? The British would do this, the Americans would do this during World War II. I mean, you would have fake stories in the BBC, you would have fake troop movements. I mean, just before D-Day, for example, they set up an entire fake army off the coast of, so just opposite Pas-de-Calais in France. You know, they did this to make the Germans think that the invasion was coming from there. A fake army, an entire fake army, rubber tanks. They even took General Patton and put him there to make it seem even more legit. So yeah, you know, it's just part of counterintelligence. I think a lot of it. They try to overstate their capabilities. Just, you know, so always take that with a grain of salt. But something definitely happened, right? Iran is calling this an act of terrorism, and that's what it is. Like when you were blowing up nuclear scientists and nuclear facilities and assassinating people for you know, no, this is blatant terrorism. It's state-sponsored terrorism. It's state terrorism, just flat out. And no one does anything to them, right? Nothing. They just get away with it.